Hi, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And I'm really excited to have another guest joining us here today, Dr. Catherine Wu. Hi, Catherine, who's joining us
Hi, Victoria.
all the way from Singapore. So thank you for being here so late in your day. I'm incredibly excited to have you on the show ever since we met back in London in October, a few months ago. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm very excited to be here. And I'm so glad that, we got to have this chance to chat again because I have a very fond memory of our time meeting in person in London a few months ago.
It was lovely. Absolutely. And, I'm really been following you for a long time, and I love what you're doing in the space of cultural intelligence.
Yeah.
And the first question I want to start with is that I know you talk about yourself as a cultural intelligence evangelist, which I just love. I love this idea. So, what do you mean by this, and why an evangelist?
Uh, so the story of me calling myself an evangelist is a personal journey that started, I want to say, about 2 to 3 years ago. At a time where I was at a very low point in my career. I had finished my PhD. I had been working as a teacher, teaching cultural intelligence in the university for quite some time. And I was thinking, okay, what's next, right? And at the time, I think I was struggling also with a lot of what I call like my own limiting belief about what I could and couldn't do. And one of this was related to how to communicate in a way that people understand me. And the challenge when you are in academia is that the training is so rigorous, and we are trained to be so technical in the way we structure and communicate around ideas that when I talk to normal people, they don't understand what I'm trying to say. Or they switch out because it's just too boring, right? So anyway, so about 2 years ago, I decided that I'm going to take this as a personal challenge to share what I had learned on this idea of cultural intelligence, both through my studies, my PhD, but also my work, because I had been training and teaching people for a long time. And one thing I had realized is that this topic, these skills can really transform people's lives. I have seen stories of transformation, people coming to me and say, learning about these things have really completely changed the way I approach my relationship with others. And so I started, talking about cultural intelligence. That's where I launched my podcast. And then I started writing on social media. And as I was doing this, I was thinking, okay, but who am I, right? Like on social media, when you start becoming a public figure, you need to give yourself some kind of like title or label. And it's like kind of like, yeah, teacher, lecturer. It doesn't sound very exciting. And why would people follow me, right? So I little by little, I came to this idea that I am not, my core mission is not to train people. My core mission is to tell the world about something that many people are not even aware of. And so I started, naturally the word evangelist came to mind. And I struggled for a while. I'm like, evangelist, to me, it had a very strong religious connotation. It's like, I'm kind of like, am I here to evangelize people, to make them change their minds, adopt ideas? But then I realized that evangelist is a very common word used in technology. So I knew an HR manager from IBM years ago, and she called herself an AI evangelist. And she was working on projects at IBM, internal projects, where they were developing AI tools specifically to support the HR, human resources function. And that they will develop internally into IBM, and later on they will commercialize. And I thought, okay, well, if in technology people use evangelists all the time, and if evangelizing from a technology point of view is about pushing the adoption of a particular product or a particular tool, then I think that applies to me. And so I decided to try with cultural intelligence, and it's been working quite well. I think people resonate with this idea. It's a good conversation starter. And to me, it really served my mission because my mission, I've been in teaching and training for 20 years in cross-cultural skills, cross-cultural communication. And at the beginning, I used to think, our role is really to train skills, like to make sure that people know what to do. But actually, over the years, I've realized that this is important. But what is even more important is to build awareness. Because when people are aware that they can develop certain skill, that there is something they can do to improve, some area of their life, then they will go the full length to increase the skill. Maybe they will sign up for a course. Maybe they will read a book. They will find a way to learn. But until you have the awareness, you won't take that step.
Yeah.
And so I decided that, maybe there are many people already teaching and training skills. I'm also one of them. But I feel like maybe the world needs more people to build awareness, and especially on social media, because social media is this new Far West. Very few people in reality speak about cross-cultural skills. Let's say on LinkedIn, for example, you and I met on LinkedIn, right? There are a few, but very little, including the big, the guru of culture, people who write the books and all of this. Very few are actively engaging people on social media around those topics.
This is amazing. I'm just going to jump in because
yes, please go.
everything you're saying is so amazing. And this idea of cultural intelligence,
yes,
being an evangelist for it. And I know you've set a mission to reach 10 million people, which is fantastic. I mean, I love this idea. But, this idea of cultural intelligence, why do you think it's not so well known? Because I think there are lots of people who work in global organizations, maybe who are listening to this, people who have even lived in many countries and would consider themselves either global citizens or culturally aware. But is that different from being culturally intelligent in your view?
Yeah, so this is a question I have been pondering over, especially recently. And I don't think it's different. I think it's the same thing. I just feel that some people are very good at crossing cultures. And, this is the way, maybe I have to we have to go back to the genesis of this concept of cultural intelligence. People have traveled around the world. There has been organizations have sent expatriates, everywhere for a very long time. So this is not new. Anthropologists have studied cultural differences for centuries, right? People who travel have documented how people in one part of the world do things and so on. So there is an understanding that when you work with people from other cultures, you can expect some differences. And there are some skills that people can learn to bridge and match the differences. But traditionally, up until, not too long ago, most of these models that people use to train those skills were really targeted at people who go abroad, like expatriates. So it would be like, okay, Victoria, you're going to be sent to Indonesia. Let's give you a training about how to do business with Indonesians, right? So the focus was very centered on one particular culture with a strong emphasis on imparting cultural knowledge. So that's why, when I started 20 years ago, there was this website that had all this, you could find all the do's and don'ts of going to any country in the world. You could pretty much like Google a country and that particular website will have a list of the do's and don'ts. But do's and don'ts are not practical, even though they come intuitively to mind when people think about working internationally. Now, in the 1990s, researchers from my university here in Singapore started thinking about the problem from a different angle. So they were working with multinational companies that had to, they were working on this problem called the Y2K. So the Y2K was an IT problem. So it was based on this idea that during the 20th century, the IT programmers had, the standard dating, system to put dates in computers was using two digits. So the year 1994 will be recorded as 94, right? But as the world prepared to go into the next century, there was a question mark of what's going to happen when we move from the year 99 into the year 2000, right? It's going to go back to the year 00. So there was a massive need to recruit programmers to fix that. And in Singapore in particular, which is very small as a country, they used to bring programmers from all over Southeast Asia, including as far as Australia, right? And some companies really struggled. And so they brought in this team of researchers from Nanyang University, where I work, to look into this. And at the time, the researchers were thinking, okay, these guys, they are really smart. They're very capable. So what is the problem here? And they started looking from the perspective of a cross-cultural competence. They approached this problem from an issue of adaptation. Mm-hmm. They say these people are struggling to adapt to an international environment. Because here you had teams. It was not just Victoria going to Indonesia. Now it was Victoria working with someone from Indonesia, somebody from India, somebody from Singapore, somebody from Australia. And so if you see it from this angle, it's like, okay, but am I expecting you to learn all the do's and don'ts of all this culture? That's crazy, right? So the researchers started looking at this and they say, well, beyond the knowledge about these different cultures, what else, do you need to adapt well to this different environment? And so they changed this idea of thinking of cross-cultural competence and cross-cultural communication. From originally it was about another culture. I learn about the culture, I adapt to that culture, into what can I do as a person so that I can adapt and learn about any culture, even cultures I've never encountered before.
Mm.
So now, back to your question, right? Why is it that people don't understand or don't know? I think it's because many of those skills, some people have already. You see, when you do research, you don't invent anything new. You formulate, you describe something that you think exists in the world, and then you go out in the world and see if it really exists. So when those researchers formulated this model of cultural intelligence, then the next step was to go out in the world and to see, can we find people who display these qualities? And they did find them. And they found them so much that they were able to establish that when you have these skills, these qualities of cultural intelligence, you tend to do better, you adapt better, you make more international friends, you have fewer conflicts, you make better decisions, all kinds of positive outcomes in a work environment. So people don't talk about cultural intelligence because they know about it, but only intuitively. Mm-hmm. They know that when they go to another culture, when they are in a team, intuitively, they are able to see, oh, this guy, that's how they do certain things, right? So it's an intuition. But when we talk about cultural intelligence in training, for example, suddenly I like to say we translate the implicit, we make the implicit explicit. So we don't specifically train people, but instead we give them a framework, a tool to explain what they have known all along and done intuitively.
Yes.
So
yeah, that's really interesting. And I think I'm just going to sort of jump in because I think there's something really fascinating about that, which is, I'm really conscious that particularly pre-pandemic, actually, I was working with a lot with people who are relocating. And I think relocation has fundamentally changed, particularly in the UK. But I think what was happening was that, people were wanting to say, well, can you tell me everything there is to know about British culture? Yeah. Now, the UK is a pretty small place compared to many countries in the world. But just like many other places, it's really diverse. So which version of British culture should I talk about? Should I talk about London culture and all the diversity that exists in London? Should I talk about the different countries within the UK? And of course, it's quite hard to say, like really definitely, this is exactly what you should do. And this is exactly what you shouldn't do in every situation with every person who claims that this is their culture. And I think that's the bit which I think you're saying as well, which is that, connected with me, cultural intelligence transcends that and says, okay, yes, there are differences and there is plenty of research around that. And it's much more about understanding, okay, what are the capabilities to help me work better in this situation when
That's
I've
right.
got many, many different cultures
Yeah.
and I'm working virtually and not meeting these people very regularly. So how do I do that really, really successfully?
Yeah, that's right. And that model, I mean, I think in your case, for example, people come to you because they want to relocate to the UK. I think one of the challenge that you face is to tell them, yeah, which culture. But I feel this is also that as you become more knowledgeable about a culture, it becomes your understanding of it becomes more nuanced and more varied. Whereas these people who are new, at first, they see this culture, the UK, as a unified, homogeneous culture. And then as they spend more time into it, little by little, they are able to refine their understanding of the culture. So people naturally are going to ask you, how are things done in this country? That's natural because when you go to a new place, you don't know, right? So the way to manage like uncertainty is to look for more information. I mean, anybody who has a problem, I don't know for you, when I have a problem in life, I just read all the pages on Google about that problem, right? So we fix uncertainty with knowledge. So this is a natural instinct. But I think as cross-cultural trainer, cross-cultural communication experts, we need to go beyond that. We should definitely do this. But beyond the knowledge, we also need to give people tools that can help them learn better. So in the framework of cultural intelligence, we distinguish knowledge, two types of knowledge. One is what we call the culture specific knowledge, which is, okay, in the UK, this is how you greet people. This is, how you organize a meeting. This is, okay, the approach that how people feel towards being on time or being late. This kind of very specific type of information that are unique to the cultural environment that you are in. And you can imagine this information can be about the UK, but it can be about your company. It can be about, your I don't know, your religious community or your neighborhood, anything that has a culture, you can learn some of this unique characteristics that apply to that very specific area or domain. But when we train cultural intelligence, we go beyond that because it's not practical to expect people to know everything, every little detail, right? I mean, your first question is, okay, where do I start? What do you want to know? So we also talk about another thing called about knowledge, but what we call culture general knowledge. Culture general knowledge is higher order framework, like models or ideas that allow you to describe and learn, and observe a culture, even when you don't know anything. And this is typically what you will find, when you read like books like The Cultural Map or Ofsted work on the cultural value dimensions of Trompenas, Globe, like all these models that describe cultures in terms of category or dimensions. These are what we call like meta models. So you don't need to know the score of a country on individualism, collectivism, for example, but just by knowing this category of individualism, collectivism, or let's say power distance, then when you go into a culture, really quickly, you can observe characteristics that will give you an indication of, okay, what's the relationship to power in that culture? What is a relationship to time? What is a relationship to risk, right? Things like this. And so people intuitively don't know that. These are model that you're not born, it's not in your head, right? You have to learn it. So that's the value of doing a cross-cultural training or even reading a book, because the book is not just going, I mean, they may not give you the information you need about the countries or the culture you are dealing with, but at least it will give you that tool that you can use to observe and learn, create your own mental model of what is a culture that I am now dealing with.
Absolutely. And I love that, because for me, I when I'm working with clients and helping them with cultural intelligence, it's absolutely about sometimes observing, learning through what you're seeing and what's being said, what's not being said, all of these important elements, nonverbal communication. So I'm quite curious. I mean, obviously you've been in the cultural intelligence world for a long time and coming at it from a very academic point of view and really knowing the research. So how is it evolving practically in the real world today in business? How is this concept of cultural intelligence evolving? Has it changed much, for example, since the pandemic? Has that idea, the way it's being expressed changed?
So I think it's follow what you described, right? Before the pandemic, a lot of the cross-cultural, like the cultural intelligence topic were discussed in the context of expatriation, global assignments, right? So, but nowadays relocation is less because people, because we are now communicating remotely a lot more than we used to. And so there are less of this kind of need. So the way I see it is there are two changes or two trajectory direction for cultural intelligence since the pandemic. One is because during the pandemic, we saw the DEI movement taking more prominence and becoming like picking up pace, right? And cultural intelligence is a very applicable framework to the diversity and inclusion problems or questions, because typically DEI is concerned with correcting inequalities, systemic inequalities. So DEI managers, one of their big roles is to review and assess all the policies in an organization. But there is also a need in DEI that if you want to change a culture, you have to change the systems. But it's also helpful to sensitize the individuals across the board, right? So cultural intelligence is very appropriate in that sense because it's a framework that is not specific to a culture. So you can train people about cultural intelligence, and the skills that we learn in the training will make them more, will improve their general behaviors that will contribute to better inclusion at the very interpersonal level. I mean, cultural intelligence is not going to solve the fact that your policies favor one group over another one, right? But cultural intelligence can make people more collaborative. It can encourage people to review the way they communicate during meetings, during Zoom calls, and things like that. So cultural intelligence help at the lower level, at the individual level, I want to say. The second direction I see, and this is one that people don't talk as much about because it is less, I want to say it's less political and less emotional, than DEI. I mean, DEI is clearly about discrimination, reducing injustice and discrimination. So, of course, there is a strong emotional component attached to this. But there is another trend that is ongoing and that has been pushed by the pandemic that is silent because, again, less emotional, but is the fact that we are collaborating globally every day now. Some statistics show that by 2030, between 2022 and 2030, the size of the video conferencing market will double. We're talking about billions of Zoom calls, So what that means, it means that many of these calls are happening within countries, even within cities, because people are working from home more and all of that. But actually, more and more of these calls are also involving people across cultures. Because nowadays, you don't need to travel anymore to work with an expert from another country. So even if you are a multinational company, you can have expertise located in different parts of the world. And through video conferencing, you can connect these people, very easily and very, very, very cheaply.
Yes, absolutely agree. I think that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Like there's that opportunity but it's also that instantaneous communication. However, what you're saying is really interesting. The cultural intelligence has to be there to be able to make the most of that communication, right?
Yes. And so I say, historically, there were three barriers to cross-cultural communication. The first one was geography. If you wanted to meet people from other culture, you had to travel to another country. Nowadays, technology has solved that. You and I, we are talking across cultures, across countries, across time zones, and we can do this so easily, right? So technology has fixed that. The second one is language. To be able to work across culture, we need to have a common language. Now, there are, I don't know, I think it's like 2.5 billion people speak English around the world. It's still not the majority of people. I think it's about 1/3 of the world population. But still, I mean, that's already a lot of people. And many other people don't necessarily speak English, but they still they may speak other languages that allow them to connect across cultures. So language and technology have bridged these barriers. And I think they are the most obvious barrier to cross-cultural communication. The last one, culture, is the one that is less visible. And, even if we go back to your earlier question, why people don't think about culture or cultural intelligence, because they don't see it, because culture is not visible. And in the past, when you had to live in another country, you go study abroad, go work abroad. I mean, very quickly you will see the difference because culture is right in your face, right? You have to you experience it. But when you are in a Zoom call, how do you see the culture, right? How do you experience it? And the culture is still there. But you are so limited, not just in terms of how much sensory information you collect from people because of the limitation of, only see my face, right? But also you are limited by the fact that we spend so little time together. So how do I learn more about you, right? About your reality, your side of, what happened in your side of the world. Like I'm in Singapore, it's probably like 28 or 30 degrees outside. It's raining, it's another rainy afternoon in Singapore. It's like, my air conditioning is on. I imagine it's also probably raining in the UK, but the temperature is certainly much lower than that.
Absolutely not. Exactly, right? Yeah, it's 11 degrees here and it's rainy and it's windy, right? But we don't know. We don't know. And I think that's a really interesting point because the technology allows the spontaneous, the very quick connection, but it's a technical connection, not a human connection. And I think that's really interesting because obviously what the technology doesn't always allow is that personal get to know each other in the way that if I went to visit you in Singapore, we'd spend some more time together. We'd go for more coffee. Right. We'd go for a meal. We'd do something just because I'm traveled that way to have the business conversation with you. So that's really interesting. So what's your view on that? How do people who are listening to this, who are doing this regularly, perhaps even all day, every day, hopping on and off calls with people in different cultures, with different time zones, how can they bring more of that cultural intelligence to the fore?
I think the challenge of communicating across cultures and across, using technology is that we have to be very intentional about cross-cultural communication. I'll give you an example. So I work with colleagues in the University of Edinburgh, and they told me the story that they, throughout, since the war started in Ukraine, they have maintained collaboration with Ukrainian universities. And so my colleague was telling us, so we will have regular call. I wasn't in that, but they will have regular calls. And she will say, sometimes the call is interrupted by a siren and they will tell us, oh, we have to go down to the bomb shelter.
Wow.
Right. So what I want to say by that is when you are in the same physical space, you have a shared experience. So it's like the learning is not just through the words that we exchange. The learning is also through the fact that we are going through the same time of the day, the same environment, the same broader experience. When we work remotely across, using technology mediated tools, we don't have that. We are completely deprived from this shared experience part. And so we need to recreate that. And in fact, there are studies that had found, and these are not new studies, maybe 15 years ago, had already found that there was a very strong difference between teams that were co-located in the same multicultural teams that were located in the same place and teams that were in different regions. And they had found that teams that were across cultures, different regions, would have more conflict. And part of it is because they will share a lot less. They had less of this overlap, not just an overlap of culture, but also an overlap of shared experiences. And so if you are a manager of a multicultural team, it's really important to be intentional about creating that sharedness, that zone where we have a lot of overlap. And for this, I had met a manager once who really, really impressed me. He worked for a big aviation company, and he was one of the first managers to create a completely remote team. And that was before COVID, before the pandemic. And his team was based, I think he was based in the Middle East, and his team was based in different countries in Asia and then in the US. And he had a very clear plan on how to build a multicultural team. So they will have every quarter, they will have meetings where they talk about their culture. They will do a culture map, to share their cultural preferences, just to have that discussion, to make culture a normal topic, something we can talk about. And then they will have all these sessions where they will review, okay, so, we are a global team. We don't meet each other maybe once a year, once every other year. But why is it that we exist? What do we have in common? What can we achieve together that we cannot achieve separately, right? So creating not just a team of diverse people, but creating a team of diverse people that have a shared identity.
Amazing. I love that. Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing, right? And then the last step was to be very clear about who was everybody's roles and responsibility, very structured. But because they didn't have that shared space, that common space where they interacted physically with each other, he had to be extremely intentional about it. So they would have dedicated meeting where they would talk about, let's do a culture map. And it was not like a one-time thing where you do it for team building once every blue moon. They will do this every 3 months. They will have those meetings where they will get together and touch base again. Okay, so our mission as a team is this. Are we still doing this, right? Has anything changed in 3 months ago, 6 months ago? And I was really impressed by that. But that reinforces this point that is the intentionality that's really critical.
I love that. And I think that's such a great takeaway from this podcast, which is, the intentionality to create shared experiences, getting beyond just the meetings and the agenda of what needs to be achieved from a goal point of view, a business goal and a team goal, but actually creating something that brings people together. And what that manager was doing, I love that idea as well, that, everybody is individual within that team. And then they come together, and that makes an added value team because they understand each other's cultures so much better. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that a great example, but also very practical way that listeners could take away some thoughts from today, particularly if they're running their own teams. There is so much I still want to ask you, and I'm really conscious of time and how much time, and I know it's late in Singapore, but I know that one of the things that you're very passionate about, following you on LinkedIn, and by the way, please go follow Catherine because her posts are amazing. But one of the things you talk about, just coming towards the end of our conversation, is you talk about us all being interculturalists, no matter what we do, whether we work in the field of cross-cultural communication and cultural intelligence like we do, or whether we are people who are just ordinary people working in business. What do you mean by that? We are all interculturalists.
Yes. So the idea of interculturality is somebody who is in between cultures, right? And you can be in between culture without knowing anything about cultural intelligence and all these academic models or whatever jargon that we're talking about. An interculturalist to me is somebody who is at the what I say, at the interface of culture. If you are in a cross-cultural marriage, you are an interculturalist. If you are an expatriate, you are an interculturalist. If you are an exchange student, you are an interculturalist. If you are an immigrant, you are an interculturalist. You are someone who has a knowledge and an understanding and an experience of one culture, which is your own. Sometimes you yourself has multiple culture inside you because of your upbringing. And then you interact with others who have a different cultural upbringing and environment. And because you are connecting cultures, you are a bridge between the two. So to me, an interculturalist is a bridge. Is somebody who has the potential to connect cultures, to bring more understanding. And the reason for this is because, back to that question, people don't see culture. You don't see your culture. I don't see my culture. I only started seeing my culture, my French culture, when I went to the UK as an exchange student. right? And then I had classmates from Germany. And then after that, I went to live in China. And then I came to Singapore. You can only see culture at the interface of culture. It's at this point where different cultures touch each other, meet with each other, that suddenly your most fundamental beliefs and ideas about what to think, what to do, get challenged. And it's only when you are at that point of contact between cultures that you start recognizing culture. And so you can start talking about it. Because again, what was implicit, what was in your head you took for granted, suddenly becomes something outside of you. It's no longer you, it's one part of you. And you learn to to go back and forth between the two. And so that's why, for example, for many people who have lived abroad, one of the first need that they feel when they go spend time in another country is to learn about their own culture.
Yeah.
And so to me, somebody who can talk about their culture from an external way as a culture is somebody who is capable to bridge other culture, because you can help now as an interculturalist, you can help other people see culture better. However, not all interculturalists are equipped to bridge that gap, to be a cultural bridge. They all have the potential to be, but they are not all ready for it.
Yeah.
And so what I believe is the fundamental condition to be an interculturalist is to have that experience, that experience of crossing cultures, of living or working at the interface of culture. But then to be an interculturalist that really bridge culture, you need to have the tools and the models and the methodology to translate that intuition, that you can feel, you can sense, into something that I call, translating intuition into an expertise, something that you can convey clearly to others so that others can apply it to themselves and they can use it to replicate their success.
Understand.
And of course, you need to have the courage to tell the world, right? If you read a book because you have been abroad, you have been a manager abroad, and or you have managed a global team, and you read the book and then you had all this aha, but you keep it all to yourself, then you are an intercultural. I mean, you have the potential to do something, but you're still not a bridge. And this is the last point. Like when I do corporate training, like with senior leaders, this is, I think, the message I want to convey to them is, cultural intelligence is a skill. You probably, if you've worked across cultures, if you work globally and you have had success, you probably already have it. And maybe you can learn the models and the tools to develop it even more for you. But as a leader, your role is not just to develop yourself. Your role is to develop others. And it's not enough for you as a global leader to be culturally intelligent, to be successful at leading global teams or global organizations. You also need to be able to create the structure and the system so that you can help others in your team, including those people you work with who never left their own country. All these global remote teams of people who don't have any international experience other than talking to you on Zoom, right? These people, you also have a responsibility to help them recognize that experience that they have is a cross-cultural experience. And through that experience, they themselves can develop a skill that is useful, to bring more cross-cultural understanding, more inclusion, make the world a better place. And if the only thing that motivates you is, profit and performance, that already is going to happen if people are more culturally intelligent.
I love
cultural
that.
intelligence is both, right? Yeah.
I love that. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that's a really nice sort of endpoint to today's podcast, which is, the point is, it's not enough for us to be ourselves culturally intelligent. We actually have to help others do it as well in our teams. And certainly, Catherine, talking to you, I can see why you call yourself the cultural intelligence evangelist. You are so fascinating to listen to, and I can see how passionately you feel about this topic. Now, I know I will certainly be directing people to follow you on LinkedIn. As I mentioned already, your posts are fantastic. I learn so much each day. I'm very inspired when I'm following you. But what are other ways for people to find out more about your work, what you do in academic or corporate space, and how can they find out more about you and what you're talking about around this topic?
Yes. I would say the best way at this point to learn more about, cultural intelligence and my work and my ideas is to follow our podcast called the Cultural Quotient podcast. I'm not alone talking on it. My partner Ting is a manager in a multinational organization, and so we trade lots of stories from our travels, our work, working across cultures, from both an academic and a practitioner, manager, business perspective. So I would say that's the best way. Another podcast I would like to recommend, because this is one I'm not the one speaking in it, but I produce it with my MBA students. It's called CQ, Leading with Culture in Asia. And this is a curation of my students. So these are MBA students or professional with experience in multinational organization, and they come from all over Southeast Asia. And a few of them come from other parts of the world. And they share stories from their experience of working internationally and reflecting on how their experience has shaped them, their cross-cultural experience. So it's really interesting to listen as well, because you get some insider stories, from people growing up in China as a third culture kid. People leading teams in India, in Indonesia. It's really a very interesting stories. And at the same time, you can also learn about cultural intelligence because they've taken my course. So they will also explain to you the theory that's behind
Excellent.
it.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, because I've listened to your main podcast, and
Yes.
but I haven't listened to the one about Asia and your MBA students.
Yes.
So I will absolutely put the links in the show notes. Everybody can
Okay.
follow those.
Yeah.
Highly recommend them. I love how you talk on your podcast. Great. Well, thank you for sharing. Any other ways that you'd like to invite people to follow you or get in touch if they want to know more about also your training or anything that you do in your space?
Yes. At this point, LinkedIn is my primary point of contact. I do very little training, I need to say, so because currently I'm working on more ideas, more projects. I'm writing a book. So for now, LinkedIn and social media will be the best way to get in touch with me.
Fantastic. Well, I know myself, I'm very excited to read your book when it comes out. But Catherine, thank you so much for joining me all the way from Singapore. I know it's incredibly late with you, and so I'm really very grateful that you so generously gave your time today to come on the show and share all these amazing insights around cultural intelligence. So thank you for joining us, and really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing everybody next time on Cultural Communication Confidence.
Thank you.